Hi, everyone. So great to see you. I'm really excited to be here today, talking with some really wonderful women and advocates in the disability space. Suzanne Potts. I am with Athletes for Hope as the Chief Wellbeing Officer, and I am a disability advocate through the life of my son, who is a young man living with autism. I'm really excited to introduce our guests or have them introduce themselves. If Jenny, you want to kick us off?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Jenny Sichel. I am a 2016 Paralympian in the sport of rowing, and I won a silver medal at the Rio Games in that. And I also went on then to coach at the 2021 Tokyo Paralympics, and now have continued my coaching career in the sport of rowing. And I also work full time for a disability advocacy national nonprofit. I don't even know how you want to call it, but yeah, I work in independent living. So we'll go with that. So thanks, and excited to talk to everybody.
Thank you. Meredyth.
Hey, everybody. My name is Meredyth Mason. I am a visually impaired adaptive athlete. I'm also a guide dog user. I was not privileged to be a Paralympian, but I definitely participate in Paralympic sports. I've played goalball, I've done boccia, I do golf, shooting. I mean, you name it. I'm a generalized athlete. I love all sports. My mental health advocacy is partly attributed to my vision loss, but like Suzanne, I also have a child with a disability who lives with autism on the autism spectrum disorder. So a mother with a disability, a child with a disability. So disability advocacy is so important to me, and I'm thrilled to be here today. Thank you so much.
Awesome.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jaleen Roberts. I was born with cerebral palsy, and I am a two-time Paralympic silver medalist from the Tokyo 2020-2021 games in track and field. And I currently train at the Chula Vista Elite Athletic Training Center for 2024 Paris.
Awesome. Well, we're so glad to have you all here. Such powerhouse room of women. Why don't we just jump into this? Like, we're talking about disability awareness. We're also talking about it is Women's History Month, but also why are we talking about this in general? Like, why do you think it's important for athletes to be advocates in this space? And anyone can go.
I think that it's important for us to be advocates in this space because I feel like a lot of people view us athletes like we are like have a superhero kind of complex, if that makes sense. And that we don't deal with day-to-day triumphs that everybody else deals with, or just mental health struggles in general. And so I think that's important because part of my advocacy work is making sure that especially younger female athletes with disabilities, but all athletes, understand that it's okay and it's brave to not be okay, and then to speak up and reach out, so that, they can, because I know we'll talk about it later in this panel, but I know that there's just so many intersections between mental health and being an athlete and all of that. So I think it's just important so that we can raise awareness for other athletes and then encourage them. And then hopefully that'll just be a catalyst for more conversations that are had amongst us.
Love it.
I'm happy to give 2 cents, unless Meredyth, you want to?
Oh, go for it.
Yeah, so I come from a little bit different perspective where my disability is my mental health disability, which technically when I was at the Rio Games, I was considered an athlete competition partner because I don't have a classifiable disability. And I competed with the boat and won a silver medal with them and am considered a Paralympian, but I was an athlete competition partner in the games, which I loved. Like, don't get me wrong, it was an amazing experience all around. I just wanted to clarify that a little bit too. But I think that with the intersection of disability, mental health, and sports, I mean, for me, it was all of the above. And I think that there are a lot of athletes out there with and without disabilities and classifiable disabilities, different types of disabilities, who may not necessarily or might be afraid to say something about mental health and about how they're feeling, or, you know, it could be a like performance anxiety, or it could be disability level mental health. Either way, I think the more we talk about it, the more we destigmatize it. And the more it opens up the avenue for other athletes who might be starting out, who might be lifelong competitors, who might be 5-time Olympians and have won multiple medals. It doesn't matter. Like, we all have mental health. And so I think the more we talk about it, the more quote unquote normal it gets. And I think it should be. It should be normal. The norm should be to talk about mental health in sports. And so that's why, like, I think just like the norm should be to talk about disability, nor like, I think that it all comes together. Like, in the end, we're athletes.
Mm-hmm.
And that's athletes with disabilities, athletes who don't identify as having a disability. But either way, like, we need to discuss it. And I think that's why the intersection is so important.
Well, and then let's talk about acquired disability. Meredyth, do you want to answer this question? Because I feel like we have the full spectrum here of athletes.
Yeah, so I was born with my disability.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I acquired the symptoms later in life, but I was actually born with it. So okay. I kind of have the similar thing that Jaleen has going on. I was born with it, but lived a quote unquote, you know, typical life for the first 30 years of my life. So it's interesting, you know, 25% of the population is considered disabled now. So for it not to be normalized, to Jenny's point, it is a shame. I mean, 1 in 4 people, right? And that includes spectrum, that includes, you know, mental health issues. It's not just the physical or the visual or the hearing disabilities. It's all of the disabilities. And then from my perspective, the reason why mental health in sports is so important is because a lot of people participate in sport due to their mental health issues and or their disabilities, correct? A lot of us get into it because it's an outlet for us. We love it. I love moving my body. There's nothing better than being in motion. And then there's the other side of it. And I think Jenny also talked about this, which is, well, then there's the anxiety and depression that comes with competition and the issues of not winning or performance or injury. So it's kind of interesting that mental health and disability kind of sits in the middle between being an athlete and not being an athlete. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of an interesting conversation. I love that double-edged sword. That's really why I love being in this conversation.
I love that it's so, I love, and I also struggle with the fact that it's so layered for everyone, right? Because as Jenny said, everyone has mental health. Everyone has challenges sometimes or have things that potentially could come their way. But I also think the intersectionality is a big piece of this, because we all have so many things that come at us in life. So I love what you said about all of that. And
can I chime in again?
Yeah, please.
Sorry, your comment about acquired disability just kind of like, I don't know, hit home with me a little bit. And so I just wanted to mention kind of my experience and a little bit of my experience. Not that my mental health disability isn't acquired. I was born with the chemical composition of my brain. But I actually didn't realize that it could be a disability until I was 27. And that it was disability level until I was 27. And so that was 1 year before I competed in the Rio Games. And so I was already in the Paralympic circuit at that point, competing as a coxswain in the boat. And always it was one of those things where, I wasn't like, I knew that, I don't know, it was just a different kind of feeling to not necessarily realize that you're a part of the disability community. And yet you feel so a part of it. I don't know, but I just thought that was interesting, where it was like, I didn't realize till later that I was actually in the disability community in life. And I always thought that it was just like, hush, hush, like, don't say anything about your mental health, because it's so like taboo. And because, it's not necessarily identified all the time as a disability, I think that it's very much like a lot of coaches don't understand. A lot of athletes don't understand. And so in that regard, like, I would always keep it hush hush. And then I was like, after I retired is when I really started talking about it, because I knew I couldn't get kicked off the team anymore.
Right. So that fear of stigma was no longer
Yeah.
there for you.
I don't really know where I'm going with this, but
No, but you're leading right into the next part, which was discussion on intersectionality, right?
Mhm.
So it's like sports, mental health, disability. How is that all connected, or what does that mean to you? And I think again, a couple of you have mentioned this already, that we are parts of many communities in who you claim to be when you talk about your identity. And so, what does that mean for you when you think about sport and mental health and disability?
Yeah,
And that can
imagine
be
for
any.
me
Mhm.
being, I've actually had somebody say this to me. I'm not blind enough, or I'm not disabled enough. And I sit there and I look at the person and go, well, you don't live in my shoes. You don't know what my life is like. You don't know how difficult it is to do the things that I have to do. So one of the reasons why I never became a Paralympic athlete was because the opportunity didn't present itself, because the
Hmm.
sport I love the most, there's no international level competition for a blind shooter.
Mhm.
So not internationally, I can compete nationally in the SH3 category, and I win all the time. Because again, there's very few female shooters in this country, especially with low vision. But again, to be told, think about your mental health for a second, right?
Mhm.
It's such a teeter-totter, right? It's a seesaw. At any given moment, something terrible could happen and totally throw you off. But to constantly live every day being what I call sighted passing, people are like, well, you don't look blind. And I go, well, what does looking blind mean? Right. So,
Right.
yeah, this intersectionality, I've talked about this in our group many, many times before.
Mhm.
We're so many things, we're so many pieces and parts. And, other than just mental health, sport, and disability, right? We're also women. We could be mothers, we could be daughters, we could be sisters, we could be girlfriends, whatever. We're so many different pieces of the whole.
Mhm.
And, this organization, Athletes for Hope, is all about the whole being, right? We talk about this all the time. We're a
Yes.
whole person. I'm not just a blind person. I'm not just an athlete, right? I'm not just whatever. I'm me. I'm Meredyth. I'm this whole being. So yeah, the intersectionality, it's such a fun conversation. I really love talking about and exposing my vulnerability to everybody and sharing who I really am. I'm done with the imposter syndrome. Those days are over.
Mhm.
I'm proud, right? I'm proud of being a disabled person. I hate the word, but I'm proud of being a disabled person.
I love that. That's been your experience. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
Anybody else, Jaleen, do you want to comment on this question at all?
Yeah, so I think a couple things. I think Meredyth did a great job on touching on all of that. I think a couple things too is with the intersectionality of mental health. Well, for me and Paralympic sport specifically, I definitely saw a change, and I don't know, if this applies to all athletes, but I'm sure that some can connect with it. I definitely noticed a positive change in my mental health once I was introduced into a community of athletes that I could relate to, because growing up, I never wanted to be a part of any um, ambulatory division at my high school level or Paralympics, because my disability was always something as I deemed quote unquote as normal, because I just never talked about it, and I've always competed with able-bodied athletes. But I think that um, finally taking that leap of faith and becoming involved in the Paralympic movement, then I was able to kind of feel a sense of belonging that I wasn't necessarily missing, but I didn't know it was possible to experience.
Mhm.
And so I think just having a community of like-minded people around you, and then also getting to be a part of Athletes for Hope, where you're working with I'm working closely with other mental health ambassadors that have been through the same or similar lived experiences. And so having, being a disabled athlete, or athlete with a disability, with also mental health struggles, it just allows me to connect with so many different groups of, not only do I get to connect with the disabled community, but I also get to connect with mental health realm of it. And so I really like that piece of intersectionality. And that's just my whole life is intersectional, I think, because not only do I have those three parts, but then also being an athlete who's part of the LGBT community, and then also who is biracial and
Mhm.
part African American. So yeah, I also love the topic of intersectionality, because I feel like I embody that, and a lot of people around me embody that. So
That's awesome. I love that. I feel like, I wrote down what you said. My whole life is intersectional, and I think that's true. It took me a long time to realize that. In some ways, just that we're the sum of all of our parts, and to be comfortable and confident, especially as a woman in this space. So I love that you said that.
I also, I
yeah,
love that, Jaleen, you mentioned about feeling a sense of belonging, that you didn't necessarily know you wanted or needed or whatever it might be. But when you got there, it was like, oh, because like, while I don't necessarily have a physical disability, I think that for me, finding a sense of belonging in the disability community in general was like, gave me such power, and it really helped my athletics too. So I just really related to that a lot.
Yeah. Love it. Well, one of the things we're doing, and I've heard a couple of you talk about, changes either with classification or, legislative or whatever it is, we're working on an advocacy day. Our second advocacy day is coming up. And we think about legislative changes, or it could be policy changes within your sport. Or is there anything that you would want to see change? And maybe if that's too loaded of a question, then if we as maybe I'm not part of the disability community or not part of your experience, how could we best represent your needs if someone were to speak for you or with you? Or is that something we should even do at all? I'm really curious. Yeah, Jenny.
I mean, so I am very passionate about getting education for athletes and coaches in sports. Because I think that, especially from the coaching world, now being on that side, there is little to no education for coaches about mental health. And whether that be about their mental health as coaches or the athlete mental health as their athletes. And I can only imagine how much better the athlete's performance would be if coaches had knowledge of how to create a mental health culture on their team. And honestly, I think like at some points this might need to be required, kind of like we have a safe sport. Just because I think it would not necessarily catch on if it weren't required, even though it will improve performance. But I think that it's so stigmatized at this point that there might need to be legislative action taken for something like this, where you really get the coaches the education they need to not only deal with mental health crises with their athletes and know where to go, but just mental health of athletes in general, and creating that safe culture on the team for athletes to feel confident that, when they sprain an ankle, they go to the coach and they're like, I really can't push. Like, I really can't do this. Well, maybe they, I don't know, had something that they're grieving over. And they're like, hey, I just need a day or two off and then I'll be right back to it. But this is going to give me so much more benefit than trying to push through it. But at this point, very few coaches, from what I've seen, know how to even talk about that to their athletes. So I think I would love to see something like that. And while I do agree that, I think the athletes and the coaches, I think people from the community need to speak for it. I'm very much like that disability, nothing about us without us. I think that it can often, whether you know it or not, ableism can creep in. And that could be in the disability world too. But I think it's hard. Sorry, I'm talking a lot. I think it's hard for someone, I'm really passionate about this. Someone who has not had lived experience to speak for someone who has.
I agree. Thank you.
Yeah. And I'm all on board with what Jaleen said. So not necessarily federal national level policy and legislation, but from a state perspective, impacting collegiate athletes at publicly funded schools. I won't reveal what state I live in, just because the comment I'm about to make, but my governor has defunded programs that are supporting DEI, multicultural, LGBTQIA+, as well as interfaith these programs are so incredibly important. We just talked about intersectionality and how incredibly important that is as us as human beings. We're this person's constituents, and we all identify in all of these communities. I mean, even if you're not a God-fearing person, let's say, you still have some kind of faith, whether it be spirituality or something, right? So we all have something in us that crosses those four communities. Not only has this person defunded those programs, it is also illegal to actually talk about or train students or clients within publicly funded programs. I don't honestly have words. I'm actually speechless when I talk about this. So to try to change policy and legislation, yes, we need all those things back. We need to support the queer community. We need to support, race, faith, political affiliation, gender, sexual orientation, whatever the heck it is, right? Whatever, we are human beings. That's our intersectionality. To defund those programs is basically marginalizing us, disenfranchising us, minimizing us as human beings. If you're not a white cisgender male who is heterosexual and is a conservative Christian, you don't belong. That's basically the message coming from the leadership of the state I live in. Now, none of us on this call are those people, by the way.
Loud and clear, yeah.
Well, I think too, that totally plays into sports as well.
Exactly.
And mental health. Yeah. And it's like you need all of that to have good mental health and to perform in your sport. So it's like it all relates. It's all intersecting.
Yes. So that would be, if I could get my one wish, to change the legislation in the state I reside in. And I'm sure there's other states that have the same policies and same laws and rules. And again, it's shameful at the end of the day.
What about you, Jaleen? If there was something you would change, what could it be?
Yeah, I guess both of those were good, and I liked the different how one of them was more talking about sports, the other was more talking about legislation. But I feel like as far as I'm thinking more like NGB, our national governing body, like with the different sports, or even like the Paralympic movement. I do think that it would be helpful for coaches to, or any coaches, or also any like administrative staff that we're working with, whether it's like strength coaches, nutritionists, clinicians, like physical therapists, people of that nature, like anybody who is involved in the sport and required to do safe sport. Again, to have some sort of like educational background on working with athletes, with mental health, and just how to like appropriate interactions and kind of how to, for a lack of better word, deal with it. And, I know that in schools, when I was in grade school, I had like a 504 for my anxiety, and so that gave me like extra time on tests. If I needed to sit on the outer rows, if we had like rows of desks, I wanted to sit on the outer row so I could, if I needed to leave or whatever it was, I had reasonable like accommodations for myself. And as athletes, I get it. Like most of us are adults and we can just have those conversations with our coaches. But for some of us who are just entering the sport, or, still learning how to advocate for themselves and speak up, like to have a program in place where athletes can, athletes can sit with their coaches or, admin or the head of their NGB and have a personalized plan for those athletes for, if I need to miss a day of practice because something, I need a mental health day. If I need, they're really good at providing. And I know the next question is what organizations, mine is really good at providing. We get, like, if you're on a national team, free therapy. We have opportunities like that, but I even think it would be cool to have, and I brought it up ironically just a couple of days ago to my therapist, like group therapy sessions, at mental health clinics, just like around the city, they have group therapies. But if it was a group therapy with athletes that they could volunteer to come, and it was like weekly or something, then we would see a lot more people that are dealing with the same struggles and not feel like, oh, I'm alone in this. So those are just a couple of things, like as far as just within the NGB, that I think would be really helpful in helping athletes to like come forward and not be so afraid to like speak up and embrace what they're dealing with, as opposed to feel like it's this like stigmatized, like secret thing that they don't really want people to know about.
Right. Well, and those changes you're asking for, one, it would shift things monumentally for the athletes in your network. And like most accommodations, I don't think it'd be a lot of money, to shift from, if they're already paying for personal sessions, why not add group sessions on there, right? So like we know most accommodations don't cost a whole lot of money for employers. So if it's the NGB or the governing body or whomever, most of these accommodations are feasible and easy to do. But the education piece and mandating some of that to happen, I think should happen. I'm a licensed social worker here in my state, and they added on human trafficking as a topic area. We have to get education in. Okay, so you can mandate that through certain protocol. It would be really nice to see more of that in the sports world. So
yeah, I'm just saddened, Suzanne, that we still use the term accommodations, right? Yeah. That vernacular in itself is a huge problem. We shouldn't have reasonable accommodations. It's unreasonable to call them reasonable.
Right. Yeah. Right. We should all be utilizing universal design,
Right. Exactly. Yeah. The fact that there's systems in place that still exist that exclude so many people. And like you said, it's all financial based. Let's just make the system this way. Yes. Anybody outside of that system needs an accommodation. It's like, why don't you try to reform the system to quote unquote accommodate everybody?
Right. So, yeah. Well, I know a couple of you have mentioned organizations or groups that you work with. Are there any other programs or organizations that you have felt super supported by, or that you feel like are really doing a great job in this area, so we can share them with our listeners?
I mean, I can brag about my that I work for.
Yeah, love it.
But I work for the National Council on Independent Living, and they have 100% changed my view. Well, not changed my view, but enhanced my view on disability. And I think that it very much actually relates to sports, because it's about independent living, which is consumer controlled. And basically, I mean, if you're put in an institution because you can't have the direct care workforce, or you can't have the, sorry, Meredyth, accommodations that you need. I know, I'm sorry. It's definitely a societal thing. But if you don't have that and you're stuck in an institution, you're stuck in a nursing home, there's no way you're going to be participating in sports.
Right.
And this happens to young people too with disabilities. It's not just the elderly that get put into nursing homes. Like, this is happening to people in their teens, 20s, 30s, like, who have disabilities, that if they had the appropriate needs taken care of and in place, which isn't that hard, it's just not innate to our system. It takes such a societal transformation, which is so sad. But if we could get more people living independently, not only would it decrease overall costs, but these people could then take part in sport, which may enhance not only their lives, but the lives of everybody that surrounds them as well. And potentially enhance the economy, enhance job. Like, there's so many aspects to this about independent living that really just kind of, like, I don't know, speak to the disability world from my perspective. And so I love working for, but also just love the concept of the National Council. NICL is what we call it. And I think it's also, for those of you that don't know, there are centers for independent living in every state.
Yeah. Love it.
Go search for your center if you have any questions.
Yeah, we have an amazing SIL here in Jacksonville. Actually, the gentleman who works at the SIL here in Jacksonville is visually impaired. Yes, a brother. I love it. So yeah, I love the SIL. It's really great, Jenny. So wonderful organization. I would love to shout out an organization that has national acclaim, Move United. So I actually presented a couple years ago at Move United about transforming sports that are for people with disabilities but then all people with disabilities could play, right? For example, goalball. There's no reason why someone who is sighted but has a physical mobility disability cannot play goalball. I mean, I hate to say it this way. I've thrown everybody on the ground on the court and said, let's go. Like, I don't care what your problem is. Let's go. Right?
I will join you. That sounds like so much fun.
You know, same thing with boccia, right? Boccia was designed for people with physical mobility issues. Well, guess what? I took a bunch of people with low vision out to the boccia court. And guess what? Someone with absolutely zero vision, put a sleep shade on them, hit the jack with, you know, with the ball. I mean, it's incredible. Nice. If given the opportunity to do something, anyone can thrive in the environment. So huge shout out to Move United. They're the organization that governs all the Paralympic sports clubs nationwide. So a club I was involved in Virginia called Sportable, they gave me my life back, to be honest with you. They reintroduced me to sport in an adaptive environment, right? Because again, I was an able-bodied person previously, and then sport was taken away from me with my vision loss. And then I told myself, yes, traditional sport was taken away from me, but not adaptive sport. Then when I moved to Florida, Brooks Rehabilitation, they are not governed by Move United. They're affiliated with a hospital. So they do an outpatient therapy program. And anybody with a disability, again, vision, hearing, physical, mental health, whatever it is, doesn't matter. They don't discriminate. You are more than welcome to participate. They have like 20 different sports that they do. So huge shout out. Like I said, Move United, Sportable, Brooks Rehabilitation, just incredible opportunities for all people, fully inclusive, to participate in sports and recreation.
What about you, Jaleen? Anybody you think of that has been a big help for you?
Yeah, I have maybe top three. So obviously Athletes for Hope. I love how we get to do like panels like this, and then also just like a lot of outsourcing, like connecting me to like be able to do a documentary or things like that. So like that helps, because being a part of organizations is how a lot of people even know us as athletes, because we're like featured on, you know, their pages or like whatnot that people follow. And then Sisters in Sports was ran by Danielle Umstead. She's a winter Paralympic athlete. That one is great too. I just took a speech course, or owning your story course for writing your story for public speaking. So that one is for girls specifically, female athletes with disabilities, but they take on new athletes every year, new groups of athletes, and they do a lot of outsourcing and outreaching like that, and bringing in like speaking coaches or things like that. And also mental health skills, just a bunch of cool stuff. And then the organization that got me into it all was Parasport Spokane in Washington. And that's just how I got into the sport. It's a adaptive sports program. And they have everything from recreational level. If you just are doing it, you don't want to do it competitively, or you have a full-time job and you can't do it competitively, all the way to they have athletes that go to the games, and a ton of athletes that have been to the games. So yeah, those are probably my three that I work like closely with. But
love it. So many great ones out there. And I know a lot of our athletes of all abilities work with groups like Special Olympics and Miracle Leagues and such, and just organizations that are inspiring sport of people of all ages. And I feel like that space is growing more and more. I love what Meredyth said too about anyone can thrive if given the right space, right? And seeing abilities in everybody. That's the one thing that I think sport does for people, is opens doors where others perhaps might dissuade people or say, no, you're not welcome here. But having sports that are including more people of all abilities, I think is just so powerful. And it's the thing that unites the world, sports. So I love that we're seeing so many great changes. Still some work needs to be done, and want to acknowledge that. But I do really feel strongly that sports has the power to change communities for good. And we love being part of that network too. I just want to thank you all. It's been so nice to talk with you. I could talk to you for hours, but I am grateful for your time and your clear passion for this space. I think just you talking about it is so helpful for other people to perhaps think about sharing their stories or inspire others or engage in some way. So thank you for your time and your passion.